Hello, I want to talk to you about why this bushcraft knife might not be legal for bushcraft in the UK in certain circumstances. This is a 4-inch bushcraft knife. It's made by Mark Hill. It's a really good knife. And there are circumstances in which this is legal to carry in the UK. In the UK, we've got some fairly stringent laws when it comes to carrying knives. The only knife that it is legal to carry in the UK as EDC is a slip joint folding knife. It must be a slip joint and it cannot lock, and the blade must be less than 3 inches long. Now, the law is written to say that that has to be a cutting edge less than 3 inches, but there are some conversations around whether the Crown Prosecution Service are measuring the blade cutting edge length or the length of the knife from the ricasso, which is there. So it's the top of the handle, that's the ricasso, through to the tip. That blade length is shorter than the full length of the exposed metal part of the knife. For bushcraft, we often need to use a fixed blade knife or a locking knife, which to all intents and purposes in the UK is the same thing. Now, if I am on property where I have permission to carry out the activities that I've said that I'm carrying out as part of my bushcraft activities, this is perfectly legal. My defence in court would be that I'm doing bushcraft and I need this knife for things like carving, food prep, battening wood, all those sort of things. And that would be considered probably a reasonable excuse in court. Now, the burden of proof when it comes to the Offensive Weapons Act is on you to prove your defence. So if you carry a blade that is longer than 3 inches and is locking, or either of those two, then you are automatically proven to have committed an offence. So then the burden is on you to create a defence to that charge. If I say that I'm taking this blade out into some woods to do some bushcraft and I need to do battening wood, for example, or if I want to be chopping wood for a fire, if I want to be cooking food, for example, if I don't have permission to be in that woodland because it's private property and I don't have permission to collect wood or to damage what is the owner's property, which is the wood, then technically I do not have a lawful excuse to carry this knife. So you need to be really careful when you say, oh, it's okay because you're camping or you're bushcrafting, as to how you explain why you're carrying that knife. If there is not a lawful reason for you to be using that knife, then you'd be carrying out an offence. If I went into some local woods that I don't own and I had a pocket knife, just a slip joint knife below 3 inches that I can EDC, that's no problem, and I've got one of those, which is actually a really good bushcraft knife as well. This is the TBS Boar EDC slip joint. So this is a sub 3 inch knife, sub 3 inch blade, and it's a slip joint, so I don't need to unlock anything. It just freely folds, fully closed, and that is a legal knife. I can do all sorts of stuff. I can whittle with that. I've been whittling with it today. And I can do most of the things like cutting cordage or anything that I might need to do that is, I have a lawful reason to be carrying it for in public place. So if I'm in woodland that I don't own, as long as I'm not damaging the owner's property, i.e. wood, because it does belong to them, I've got a good reason there, okay? So if I'm in a piece of public access, open access land in some trees and I've got some things with me, like a piece of wood that's my wood that I want to whittle, I've probably got a good reason for doing that and a lawful reason to be carrying out that activity. But also, because it's an EDC legal knife, I don't actually have to have a reasonable excuse for it. At the moment, I'm currently on private property on an area that I have paid to be here on. I have permission from the landowner and I have permission to batten wood. I have permission to do all sorts of things on this property with this knife. It still technically counts as a public area because people can come and go onto this land as a paid site. So just because it's private property doesn't mean that it's not publicly accessible. When it comes to knives, and I've got a piece of paper here to read from just so I get it right because this is important. If the police stop you and you have this knife on you, they're probably going to go through what they would refer to as the this list, THIS, this list. And the questions they'll be asking are, has this person got permission to use this article for this use on this land and by this landowner? If you can't answer all of those things with an affirmative, i.e. yes, then technically you haven't got lawful reason to be using that knife for that purpose on that property, and therefore under the Offensive Weapons Act you'd be committing an offence, which is a really serious offence. You also need to be aware that whilst trespass is a civil offence, so trespassing in itself isn't a criminal offence, trespassing with an offensive weapon suddenly makes that a criminal offence. So it's armed trespass. Even though that you're not committing a criminal offence just in the act of trespass, if you've got this knife on you and you don't have permission to be there, then you are committing an offence. So you need to be really, really careful. The UK doesn't have any public areas really that aren't owned by someone, whether it's the Woodland Trust, whether it's by the Crown, whether it's by private individuals. So most of the places you go, unless you have explicit permission from the person who owns that land, personally, my opinion is I'd just carry a slip joint knife like this, because you don't have to have an excuse then. As long as you're not damaging property, you're fine. I want to be clear that I am not here to give my opinions on the UK knife laws. I'm not here to say whether I think they're right or wrong. I think there's probably lots of people who've got strong feelings on this. And I'm also not a lawyer. I'm not a solicitor, and I'm not giving you legal advice. This is just my opinion on it. But I think given the stakes, i.e. whether you go to prison or not, going to court in itself is a really expensive and stressful process. You're talking tens of thousands of pounds to defend your position. So if you don't think that you have an airtight case for it, personally, I don't think it's worth the risk. Because even if you're proved innocent because your defence stands up, if the police have got a good reason to arrest you and the Crown Prosecution Service decides to charge you and prosecute, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It could cost you your job. It could cost you all sorts of things. So personally, I just don't think it's worth the risk. That said, if you have got permission to be somewhere, these Mark Hill knives are excellent. There's loads of really good knife makers out. There's of course the famous Woodlaw knife. It's Ray Mears branded knife that you've got Alan Wood, Wilkinson. So you've got all sorts of makers who've made those good makers. You've got Ben Orford in the UK, excellent knife maker, and they are excellent and really useful tools. That said, don't risk having it confiscated, because it's a lot of money to have confiscated. Even if it turns out you didn't do anything wrong, you're going to struggle getting that knife back. And if you did do something wrong, you're going to lose the knife, and you're probably also going to lose your freedom as well. So just do not risk it.